Her mother shook her head, pacing the small hospital room in disbelief. No, no, this can't be true. You and Tunde are children. How could you be so careless? How could I not have seen this coming? Kemi said nothing, knowing that no amount of explanation would make things better. Her mother collapsed into the nearest chair, covering her face with her hands. She stayed like that for what felt like hours, her sobs filling the air. Eventually, she stood up, her face set in a look of determination. We need to go home. We need to talk to your father about this. The ride home was tense and silent. Mrs. Ogunleye gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. While Kemi sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window, she felt numb, her mind racing with a million thoughts. How would her father react? What would happen to her and Tunde now? When they arrived home, Kemi saw her father, Mr. Ogunleye, sitting in the living room, going through some paperwork. He looked up as he entered, a warm smile on his face that quickly disappeared when he saw the expressions on theirs. What was wrong? He asked, standing up. Is Kemi okay? What did the doctor say? Mrs. Ogunleye took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she spoke. We need to talk. Kemi is pregnant. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Mr. Ogunleye stared at his wife, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. He looked at Kemi, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but when he saw the tears in her eyes, his heart sank. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. How? Kemi, who is the father? Kemi swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she said, Is Tunde dad? Mr. Ogunleye's face twisted in shock and disbelief. He staggered backward, as if the weight of the truth had physically knocked him off balance. Tunde, he said, his voice raising with anger. Your brother. Kemi nodded, unable to look her father in the eyes. She had never seen him so upset or devastated. His hands clenched into fists as he turned to his wife. This is your fault, he shouted at Mrs. Ogunleye. I told you we needed to spend more time with the kids. I told you that they needed us, but you were too busy with your business to care. And now, look at what has happened. Mrs. Ogunleye's face crumbled as she tried to hold back her tears. Don't blame me for this. I was working for this family. You weren't home either. You were always busy with your contract. Don't act like you were the perfect parent. Kemi watched helplessly as her parents yelled at each other, blaming one another for what had happened. She wanted to scream, to tell them that it wasn't their fault, that it was her and Tunde's mistake. But she couldn't find the words. Suddenly, the door to the living room cracked open and Tunde appeared, looking pale and shaking. He had clearly heard the entire conversation. Dad, Mom, he said, his voice trembling. I am sorry. Mr. Ogunleye turned to face his son, his eyes blazing with anger. Tunde, how could you do this? How could you betray your own sister like this? Tunde's face crumbled in guilt and shame. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I swear, we didn't plan this. It just happened. It just happened? Mr. Ogunleye's voice dripped with disbelief and anger. You are 17 years old, Tunde. You should know better. This isn't just a mistake. This is a disaster. For days, the Ogunleye household was war zone. The once peaceful home was filled with shouting, crying, and silence so heavy it seemed to suffocate everyone. Mr. and Mrs. Ogunleye couldn't stop arguing. They blamed each other for their children's actions, for not being present, for failing to notice the signs. Kemi and Tunde stayed in their rooms most of the time, avoiding their parents as much as possible. The weight of guilt hung over them like a dark cloud, and every time they saw each other, The shame in their eyes was unbearable. Kemi's nausea and sickness worsened, and every day she was reminded of the life growing inside her, a life that would forever change her and her family. She had no idea what the future held for her, but one thing was certain, things would never be the same again. Her mother tried to talk to her a few times, asking what she wanted to do about the pregnancy, but Kemi couldn't give her a clear answer. She was too scared, too confused. She felt like she was floating in a sea of uncertainty, with no one to guide her. One evening, Tunde knocked on her bedroom door. Kemi hesitated, unsure if she should face him, but she opened the door anyway. "I'm sorry, Kemi," Tunde said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Kemi looked at her brother, her heart breaking at the sight of him. "I know," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen either." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their actions hanging between them like a dark cloud. "What are we going to do?" Tunde finally asked. Kemi shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know, Tunde. I don't know." As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the Ogunleye's household only grew worse. Mr. and Mrs. Ogunleye continued to argue, and Kemi's pregnancy became the elephant in the room that no one wanted to talk about. The family was falling apart, and no one knew how to fix it. One morning, Mrs. Ogunleye sat Kemi down for a serious talk. "Kemi, we need to decide what to do about the pregnancy," she said gently, though her eyes were filled with worry. "You can't avoid this forever." Kemi swallowed hard. She had been avoiding this, thinking about it, hoping that somehow the problem would disappear on its own. But now, with her belly starting to swell, she knew that wasn't possible. "I don't know what to do, Mom," Kemi whispered, her voice trembling. "I am scared." Her mother took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know, sweetheart. This is a difficult situation, but we need to make a decision. Do you want to keep the baby?" Kemi hesitated, unsure of how to answer. A part of her couldn't bear the thought of giving birth to her brother's child, but another part of her felt a strange connection to the life growing inside her. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what is right." Her mother sighed, brushing a strand of hair from Kemi's face. "Whatever you decide, your father and I will support you, but you need to make a decision soon." With her parents' support, Kemi began to think more seriously about her future and the future of her unborn child. She couldn't afford the reality of her situation any longer. At school, she had started missing classes because of her morning sickness, and she knew that soon people would start asking questions. Kemi's friend had already noticed that something was off, but she had avoided their questions, making up excuses about being sick or having family problems. But she knew that wouldn't last forever. One evening, Kemi sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked pale and drawn, and her stomach was beginning to show. She felt like a stranger in her own body, a child forced to grow up too fast. She knew she needed to make a decision, but the weight of it felt too heavy to bear. Should she keep the baby? Should she put it up for adoption? Or should she consider an abortion? Each option felt overwhelming, and no matter what she chose, her life would never be the same. But as much as she wanted to avoid it, Kemi knew she couldn't hide forever. The future was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. Days turned into weeks, and Kemi's secret was no longer something she could hide. Her pregnancy was becoming more visible. And although she and Tunde avoided each other as much as possible, the weight of what they had done hung over their heads like a dark cloud. They were both trapped in a circle of guilt, regret, and fear. At school, Kemi felt the stares from her classmates intensified. Rumors started to spread, and she overheard whispers whenever she passed by. Some of her friends stopped talking to her entirely, while others tried to pry into her personal life, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Why have you been missing school so much? Are you pregnant? I heard someone say. Kemi felt overwhelmed, but she couldn't confide in anyone. The walls around her were closing in, and there was no escape. At home, things weren't any better. Her parents' arguments had escalated to the point where they hardly spoke to each other unless it was to argue about Kemi's pregnancy. The once happy, peaceful family was now fractured with no hope of putting the pieces back together. One evening, after another heated argument between her parents, Kemi overheard her father say something that shook her to her core. I can't stay here anymore. I can't deal with this. I am leaving. Her father's voice was cold and filled with finality, and Kemi's heart sank as she realized that her family was falling apart because of her. She ran up to her room, tears streaming down her face. Guilt was too much to bear. She felt responsible for everything: the tension between her parents, the stares at school, and the growing life inside her. While Kemi was drawing in guilt, Tunde was struggling with his own demons. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. He never imagined that his feelings for Kemi would spiral out of control and lead to this. He kept to himself most of the time, barely speaking to his parents or Kemi. The guilt he carried weighed him down, and he didn't know how to fix things. His grades, once the best in his class, had dropped drastically. His friends noticed his change in behavior, but he avoided their questions. One afternoon, Tunde sat alone in his room, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the moments that had led up to this point, how it all started so innocently, how he had convinced himself that what he felt for Kemi was just a phase. But now, everything has spiraled out of control. Tunde knew he had to face the consequences of his actions, but he didn't know where to start. He felt like a coward for hiding, for not talking to Kemi, for not being there for her when she needed him the most. Finally, after days of avoiding the inevitable, Tunde gathered the courage to knock on Kemi's bedroom door. Kemi, can we talk? He asked softly. Kemi looked up at him, her eyes swollen from crying. She hesitated for a moment before nodding and motioning for him to come in. As Tunde entered Kemi's room, the tension between them was thick, and the air felt heavy with unspoken words. They hadn't had a proper conversation since the day everything came to light. Now, with nowhere left to hide, they had to face each other and the consequences of their actions. Kemi, I am so sorry for everything, Tunde began, his voice cracking with emotion. I never wanted this to happen. Kemi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. She didn't know what to say. She had heard his apologies before, but they didn't change the reality of their situation. I don't know what to do anymore, Tunde, Kemi whispered, her voice filled with despair. Our family is falling apart. I don't know how we are supposed to face this. Tunde sat down beside her, his head in his hands. I know. I hate myself for what we've done. But we can't undo it, Kemi. We have to face it somehow. They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in their thoughts. Tunde knew that he couldn't let Kemi carry this burden alone. As much as he hated the situation they were in, he was determined to be there for her. We will figure it out, he finally said, his voice filled with quiet determination. I will be here for you. We will face this together. Kemi knew she couldn't avoid the question any longer. Her mother had been patient, but the time had come to make a decision about the pregnancy. The pressure weighed heavily on her, and she felt trapped between choices that each seemed unbearable. One evening, as she sat with her mother in the living room, Mrs. Ogunleye gently brought up the topic again. Kemi, I know this is difficult, but we need to decide what to do, her mother said softly. Have you thought about it? Kemi nodded slowly, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty. She had spent countless nights lying awake, thinking about the future, about what it would mean to keep the baby or to give it up. I think I want to keep the baby, Kemi finally said, her voice trembling. I know it is going to be hard, but I don't think I can give it up. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she put Kemi into a tight hug. Whatever you decide, I am here for you, she whispered. We will get through this together. With her decision made, Kemi knew she had to tell her father. He had been distant ever since the truth came out, barely speaking to her or Tunde. Kemi feared that her father would never forgive her, that he would leave the family for good. One evening, after her father had returned home from work, Kemi gathered her courage and knocked on the door to his office. Dad, can we talk? She asked hesitantly. Her father looked up from his desk, his face tired and worn. He nodded, motioning for her to sit down. Kemi took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she spoke. I have made a decision. I am going to keep the baby. Her father's face remained unreadable, and for a moment, Kemi feared that he would lash out at her. But instead, he let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Kemi nodded. Yes, I have thought about it a lot, and I think it is the right thing to do. Mr. Ogunleye stared at his daughter for a long time, his expression softening. If that's what you want, then I will support you, he finally said. I may not agree with everything that has happened, but I am still your father. We will figure this out. Kemi felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a start. Her father's words gave her hope that somehow they would get through this together. As Kemi's pregnancy progressed, it became impossible to keep it a secret any longer. She had already stopped attending school, and the few friends she had left were beginning to ask more and more questions. One day, Kemi decided it was time to confront the rumor head on. Yes, I am pregnant. No, it wasn't planned, but I am going to do my best to take care of this baby, and I hope those who care about me will support me, she said as her friends questioned her about the rumor. The tension in the Ogunleye family didn't disappear overnight. Mr. and Mrs. Ogunleye were still distant, their relationship fragile, as they struggled to cope with their children's choices. Tunde, though determined to be there for Kemi, often felt overwhelmed by guilt and responsibility. The family's once strong bond had been shattered, and it would take time to heal the wounds. But little by little, they began to work through their pain, determined to rebuild their family no matter how difficult it might be. They also considered going for therapy. Kemi's labor came unexpectedly one night, and her family rushed her to the hospital. The pain was intense, but Kemi felt a strange mix of fear and excitement as she prepared to meet her baby. After hours of labor, Kemi finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As she held him in her arms, for the first time, she felt an overwhelming wave of love and protectiveness wash over her. Despite everything that had happened, this baby was a new beginning, a chance for her and her family to heal. The Ogunleye family was far from perfect, but they were learning to rebuild their lives one step at a time. And as Kemi looked into her son's eyes, she knew that despite the mistakes they had made, there was hope for the future. They would face it together, stronger, wiser, and with promise of a brighter tomorrow. The end. Thank you for watching. Please let me know what you think about the story in the comment section. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, please. Thank you so much.